My fiancé kept pressuring me to sign a prenup, just in case, so I asked my lawyer to add a clause he clearly hadn't read. When Garrett first brought up the idea of a prenup, 6 months before our wedding, I didn't suspect anything. He was a successful architect, and I understood his desire to protect his assets. It's just standard practice, he said, sliding the papers across the kitchen table. My business partner insists that everyone do it this way. But then he started acting strange. Every few days, he'd casually mention how important it was to get this thing settled. When I suggested that we both hire separate lawyers to do the due diligence, he waved me off. Mine's already taken care of everything. We just need your signature. The document was 47 pages of dense legalese that essentially said, if we get divorced, I get nothing. No alimony, no claim on property acquired during the marriage, no retirement benefits. Even the gifts I received go back to him. That seems pretty one-sided, I told him. Garrett's jaw clenched. Do you want to marry me or not? Red flag number 1. When I insisted on having my own lawyer check it out, he exploded. You don't trust me. 3 years into the relationship, there were accusations about the cost of the wedding and how stressed he was about his big project. Red flag number 2. My attorney, Patricia, was horrified by the terms of the prenup. It's financial abuse in legalese, she said. But if you're determined to sign, let me add some protections. We drafted additional clauses tucked into the middle of the document, standard legalese about asset disclosure, property valuation, and mandatory mediation. Nothing that would raise suspicion on a cursory glance, including one very specific provision. The day I brought the revised prenup home, Garrett barely glanced at it before signing it. Finally, he muttered, now we can focus on the important things. 2 weeks later, I discovered what those important things were. His phone rang during dinner. The preview of the message showed, can't wait for our trip to Cabo after your wedding. Love you. From someone named Ivy. I waited until he was in the shower, then scrolled through months of messages. Garrett had been planning his honeymoon in Mexico with his girlfriend for 8 months. They'd booked adjoining hotel rooms and were discussing how long he'd have to be married to me before filing for divorce. She's rich. I love her, one message read. This prenup guarantees I get half of everything when we split up. Garrett had also signed without reading Patricia's addendum, including a clause stipulating that any party who committed adultery during the engagement or marriage would forfeit all rights to the marital property and pay the bona fide spouse $500,000 in damages. I printed it all out. The next morning, I called Patricia. Enforce the adultery clause. I have the documentation. The look on Garrett's face when the bailiff showed up was worth every penny of Patricia's fee. The legal documents outlined his infidelity, his planned fraud, and his new financial obligations. You can't do that, he muttered, frantically flipping through the paperwork. In fact, you might want to check page 23 of your prenuptial agreement, the part you didn't read. His business partner's office called that same day, terminating their partnership. It turned out Garrett's advice about standard practice regarding prenuptial agreements wasn't company policy. It was his personal recommendation to help his buddies cheat on their fiancés. Ivy dumped him when she learned of the $500,000 judgment. Last month, I used the money from the settlement for a down payment on my dream home. Garrett now works at Home Depot. But that wasn't the end of it. 3 weeks after the bailiff delivered the judgment in Garrett's case, my phone started ringing. The first call came at 6:47 in the morning. Is that Melanie? My voice was shaking. Young. Yes. Who is it? My name is Chloe. I saw a news article about your fiancé, about the prenuptial agreement thing. She paused. I think he did the same thing to my sister. I sat up in bed. What do you mean? Garrett Pembroke, right? Tall, dark hair, works in architecture. He dated my sister Brooke for 2 years, made her sign something before they got engaged. Then he cheated on her with some woman at the gym. My stomach dropped. When was that? Last year. Brooke got nothing when they broke up. He kept her grandmother's ring, her car payments, everything. She still pays off their joint credit cards. I grabbed a pen. Can you give me your sister's number? I sat across from Brooke at a downtown cafe for an hour. She was 26, a preschool teacher, and looked like she hadn't slept in months. I knew there was something wrong with that prenup, she said, absently stirring her latte. But Garrett kept saying it was normal, that all successful couples did it. She pulled out a craft paper folder. I saved everything, the papers, the emails, even the records of our fights about it. The prenup was nearly identical to mine. Same 47 pages, same one-sided terms, but this one was drafted by a different attorney. Garrett's signature was at the bottom, along with Brooke's. Who was the other woman? I asked. Brooke's expression darkened. Some fitness instructor named Tasha. Garrett paid for her personal training while we were engaged. 45 minutes, twice a week, for 6 months. I did the math. That overlaps with when Garrett started dating me. Brooke, I have to ask you something important. Has Garrett ever mentioned that his business partner advised him on prenuptial agreements? She nodded slowly. Always. He said his partner, some guy named Rick, had told all the guys in his firm to protect themselves, that women these days were only after the money. Red flag number 3. And I was just getting started. I called Patricia that day. We need to dig deeper. I think Garrett's been running this scam for years. How deep, you mean? Patricia asked. How deep do you have to go? Patricia hired a private investigator named Tony Castellanos, a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud. Within a week, he had found 2 more victims. Rachel, a nurse from Portland, had dated Garrett for 18 months, signed a prenup, caught him with a coworker who was his mistress, and lost her savings, her apartment, and her faith in the relationship. And Kiara, the graphic designer from Seattle. Same story, different year. Prenup, infidelity, financial ruin. Tony spread the documents across my kitchen table, the same table where Garrett had first shown me his prenup. Here's the template, Tony said, pointing to the highlighted sections. Every prenup is nearly identical. The same law firm prepared them all. Same terms, same loopholes. And look at this. He showed me a bank statement. Garrett's been getting payments from something called Pembroke Investment Holdings. $50,000 deposited 6 months after each separation. My blood ran cold. Who owns Pembroke Investment Holdings? We're still working on it, but I have a feeling we're going to find some really interesting names. Tony's hunch was right. Pembroke Investment Holdings was a shell company owned by Richard Costas, Garrett's business partner. The same Rick who supposedly gave Garrett advice on how to protect himself. But it got worse. Tony found contracts between Garrett and Rick dating back 5 years. Garrett wasn't just swindling women. He was being paid to do it. The contracts were detailed, systematic. Garrett found successful women with significant assets. He dated them for 12 to 18 months, proposed marriage with a prenuptial agreement designed to take everything away from them, cheat on them to force a breakup, then collect his payment from Rick. It sounds like a twisted business model, Patricia said when I showed her the evidence. Emotional fraud as a source of income. I stared at the contracts, feeling sick. How many women? Tony turned to his notes. We've confirmed 7 victims over 5 years, but there could be more. 7 women. 7 lives ruined. 7 hearts broken for profit. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Brooke's empty eyes, Rachel's shaking hands, Shiara's defensive posture when she talked about trust. Garrett hadn't just cheated on me. He'd made ruining women's lives his career. The next morning, I called Patricia. I want to sue Rick too, and I want to find every victim. It's going to be expensive, Patricia warned, and complicated. I don't care. Use whatever you need from the settlement money. We set up a hotline. Patricia placed a carefully crafted ad in the legal sections of 3 major newspapers. Have you been asked to sign a prenuptial agreement by architect Garrett Pembroke? Contact us about your legal rights. The calls started coming in immediately. Victim number 8, Diane, a veterinarian from Austin. She was smart enough to back out of the prenuptial agreement, so Garrett simply disappeared one day, blocked her number, moved out of their shared apartment, left her with rent she couldn't afford on her own. Victim number 9, Naomi, a software engineer from Denver. She signed a prenup but discovered Garrett's affair before the wedding. When she tried to break off the engagement, he sued her for the cost of the wedding deposits, $23,000. By the end of the first week, we had 12 confirmed victims. Tony found more contracts in Rick's files. The business was expanding. Rick was recruiting other men, teaching them Garrett's system. They planned to franchise the operation. It's like a pyramid scheme, Tony explained. But instead of selling products, they're selling broken hearts. I called an emergency meeting with Patricia and Tony. We need to stop this now before they hurt anyone else. Patricia leaned back in her chair. What do you think? A class action against both of them, and we'll go public with it. That's a big risk, Patricia said. You're going to get in trouble. I thought of Brooke, still paying off Garrett's credit card debt. Of Rachel, who had moved back in with her parents because she couldn't afford the rent. Of Naomi, who told me she hadn't dated in 2 years because she was afraid of being scammed again. Some things are worth the risk. Patricia filed the class action on Tuesday. By Thursday, it was front-page news. Local architect accused of romance fraud, the Tribune headline read. The article detailed the contracts, the shell company, the systematic destruction of women's lives for profit. Garrett's photo was right there on the front page, smug in the architect's headshot, completely unaware that his world was about to come crashing down. The story went viral. By Friday afternoon, 3 more women had called our hotline. By Monday, we had 17 victims. The Today Show wanted an interview. So did 60 Minutes, Dateline, and every major news outlet. Patricia advised against it, but I went with Today. The more people who know about this, the better, I told her. Maybe we can stop this from happening to someone else. The interview aired Wednesday morning. I sat across from the host, calm and collected, as they played excerpts from the secret recordings Tony had found in Rick's office. The key is to make them think it's their idea. Garrett's voice came through the studio speakers. You plant the seed about asset protection, then act reluctantly when they suggest a prenuptial agreement. The host looked disgusted, and this was his job. It's very lucrative, I replied. Rick was paying Garrett $50,000 per victim. They had identified an untapped market, successful women with assets and trusting hearts. The interview lasted 12 minutes. By the time it was over, our hotline had logged 43 calls. Not all of them were from victims. Some were from lawyers offering to help for free. Others were from reporters looking to investigate similar schemes in their own cities. But 3 calls stood out. The first was from Garrett's mother. I had no idea, she said, her voice shaking. I'm so sorry for what my son did to you. To all of you. The second was from Rick's ex-wife. I always wondered where the money was coming from, she said. Rick told me it was investment income, but the timing never matched. The third call left me frozen in horror. I think they might have killed my daughter. The woman's name was Dorothy Brennan. Her daughter, Melissa, had been found dead in her apartment 6 months earlier. An apparent suicide. A single gunshot to the head. Melissa had been dating someone named Garrett. Dorothy said she had planned to marry him, but something had gone wrong. She became very depressed, stopped eating, stopped answering my calls. I clutched the phone tightly. Mrs. Brennan, did Melissa ever mention the prenuptial agreement? She's only talked about it for the last few months. How the prenuptial agreement would ruin her financially. She inherited money from her father. About $2 million. She was afraid of losing it. Patricia and I drove to Dorothy's house that afternoon. She lived in a modest cottage in the suburbs, surrounded by photographs of her daughter. Melissa was beautiful. Dark hair, bright smile, looked like she'd never hurt anyone. She was a social worker, Dorothy explained. She worked with foster children. The inheritance was to help her start her own agency. Dorothy handed me a craft envelope. I found this in Melissa's things after she died. I didn't know what it meant. Inside were copies of emails between Melissa and Garrett, the usual pattern of love bombing, followed by pressure for a prenuptial agreement. But these letters had a different tone, more aggressive, more threatening. If you can't trust me enough to sign this, one read, then maybe we're not right for each other. Maybe you're just like every other gold digger I've dated. The other was worse. I've talked to my lawyer. Apparently, if someone dies before they get married, the surviving partner can claim damages from the estate. Just think about it. I felt sick to my stomach reading this. Dorothy was crying quietly. The police had said it was suicide, that she was depressed about her relationship, but Melissa wasn't suicidal. She was the strongest person I knew. I handed the letters to Patricia. Can we reopen the investigation? We can try, Patricia said, but it's going to be difficult. The death was ruled a suicide. We'll need compelling evidence to reopen it. Tony went to work immediately. He reviewed police reports, interviewed Melissa's friends, and studied crime scene photographs. What he found was disturbing. Melissa allegedly shot herself in the head with her left hand, but her medical records showed she was right-handed and had limited movement in her left hand due to a childhood injury. The gun was registered to Garrett, and security cameras at Melissa's apartment complex showed Garrett's car in the parking lot the night she died. But police missed all of this because they had initially assumed it was suicide. Tony presented his findings to the detective who had worked the original case. Detective Morrison was a seasoned cop nearing retirement, and he didn't like being told he'd missed evidence. Look, I understand you want closure, Morrison said, but sometimes people just reach a breaking point. The girl was depressed about her relationship. It happens. Did you know the gun was registered to her boyfriend? Tony asked. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. It's not uncommon. Couples often share guns. Did you know she was left-handed? What does that matter? Tony spread the crime scene photographs on Morrison's desk. She allegedly shot herself in the head with her left hand. But look at these medical records. She had nerve damage in her left hand from a childhood accident. She had trouble even writing with it. Morrison studied the photographs for a long moment. His face went pale. Son of a bitch, he muttered. How did we miss that? Within a week, police had reopened Melissa's case as a homicide investigation. Garrett was arrested Thursday morning at Home Depot, where he worked. The arrest was caught on news cameras. Garrett, in his orange uniform, looked confused and frightened as officers read him his rights. Rick was arrested that same day at his architectural firm. Computers, files, and bank records were seized. The evidence of their fraud was overwhelming, but the murder charge against Garrett had captured the public's attention. The story was now a national hit. The handsome architect who seduced successful women, stole their money, and may have killed one when she threatened to expose him. People magazine put Melissa on the cover. The woman who died for love. The trial began 6 months later. I testified about prenuptial agreement fraud, systematic fraud, contracts between Garrett and Rick. 12 other women told their stories. Dorothy Brennan wept as she described finding her daughter's body. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Garrett Pembroke was a predator who turned from financial fraud to murder when one of his victims became a threat. Garrett's defense was pathetic. His attorney argued that the prenuptial agreements were legal, that the relationship was consensual, that Melissa's death was still a suicide despite the evidence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, convicting him on 17 counts of fraud, convicting him of first-degree murder. Garrett was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rick got 15 years for his role in the fraud scheme. The civil suit resulted in a $12 million judgment against both men and their assets. Each victim received compensation, with Melissa's estate receiving the largest share, but the money couldn't undo the damage. Brooke still flinches when men approach her. Rachel moved across the country and changed her name. Naomi started a support group for women who had been victims of romance scams. I kept a picture of Melissa on my desk throughout the trial. A reminder that this wasn't just about money or justice. This was about a young woman who wanted to help foster children and instead became a victim herself. 2 years later, Dorothy Brennan called me. I wanted to let you know, she said. I started a foundation in Melissa's name for foster kids leaving the system. It's funded by her inheritance. Money Garrett tried to steal. That's wonderful, I said. Melissa would be proud. I also wanted to thank you, Dorothy continued. If you hadn't stood up to him, if you hadn't fought back, he could have killed other women. You saved lives. I thought about that conversation long after we hung up. 6 months later, Patricia called with news. Remember that interview you did on Today? She asked. Of course. It was used as evidence in 17 other cases across the country. Apparently, Garrett and Rick's scheme inspired copycats, but your interview helped law enforcement identify patterns. I slumped in my chair. 17 new cases, 17 new trials, all successful, and in each one, your testimony was key evidence. The domino effect continued. A year later, Congress passed the Melissa Brennan Act, requiring background checks for anyone requesting information from probate databases. It closed a loophole that predators like Garrett had exploited to identify wealthy targets. 3 years after the trial, I got married. His name is David. He's a teacher, and he refused to even discuss a prenuptial agreement. "I trust you completely," he said when I brought it up. "If you want to protect your assets, that's your choice, but I'm not asking you to sign away your rights." Our wedding was small, intimate, and filled with people who genuinely cared about us. Brooke was there. So was Rachel. Naomi gave a toast about finding love after betrayal. Dorothy Brennan was there too. She gave me a pendant with a photo of Melissa inside. Melissa believed in justice. "You made sure she got it," she told me. 5 years later, the Melissa Brennan Foundation has helped more than 300 foster children transition to independent living. The foundation's logo is a phoenix rising from the ashes, Melissa's favorite symbol. Garrett is serving a life sentence in a maximum security prison in California. He appeals his conviction every year. Every year, the appeals are denied. Rick was released after serving 12 years of his 15-year sentence. He now works at a gas station and is banned from practicing architecture or working in finance. His ex-wife remarried and moved to another state. Sometimes I wonder if there are other women out there, victims we never found, stories we never heard about. Tony estimates that we have solved maybe 60% of Garrett's crimes, but I sleep soundly knowing that Garrett will never hurt another woman again. The house I bought with the settlement money is beautiful. 3 bedrooms, a garden, and a home office where I work as a victim advocate. I help women navigate the legal system after financial abuse and testify in romance scam cases. Last week, a young woman named Zoe called my hotline. Her boyfriend was insisting that she sign a prenuptial agreement, making her feel guilty for hesitating, saying it was standard practice. "I keep thinking about your story," she told me, "the one on the Today Show, and I realized his prenuptial agreement sounds exactly like the one you described." That afternoon, I went to meet Zoe. Her prenuptial agreement was virtually identical to the one Garrett had given me, right down to the specific language about returning the gift. We called Patricia. It turned out that Zoe's boyfriend had attended one of Rick's seminars before Rick was arrested. He had used Garrett's exact scheme, word for word. Zoe broke up with him the next day. She kept the ring, which, legally, was a gift she was entitled to keep. She sold the ring and used the money to go to law school. "I want to help other women the way you helped me," she told me. The cycle continues. Women helping women, refusing to allow predators to operate in the shadows, holding accountable those who would exploit trust for profit. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had simply signed Garrett's original prenuptial agreement. If I had believed his assurances, ignored my instincts, prioritized keeping the peace over protecting myself. Melissa might still be alive. 17 other women might not have fallen victim to copycat schemes. Melissa Brennan's law might never have been passed. One woman's refusal to stay silent can change everything. Patricia retired last year, but she still takes my calls. "You know," she told me recently, "in 30 years of practicing law, your case was the most satisfying victory I've ever had." "Why?" I asked. "Because it proved that predators can be stopped, that systematic abuse can be exposed, that one person's courage can be enough to protect countless others." I keep a photo of Melissa on my desk at home, next to a photo from my wedding day. Both women remind me of something important. Love should make you stronger, not more vulnerable. It should add to your life, not subtract from it. And if someone asks you to give up your rights for love, they're not offering love. They're offering a deal. And you deserve so much more. The foundation sends me updates about the foster kids they've helped. There's Marcus, now studying to be a social worker, and Priya, who started her own nonprofit for at-risk youth, and dozens of others who are building lives Melissa would be proud of. Her legacy isn't the tragedy of how she died. It's the lives that continue because of how she lived, and how we all fought to honor her memory with action. Every year on the anniversary of Melissa's death, Dorothy and I visit her grave. We bring flowers and news of the foundation. We tell her about the women we've helped, the laws we've changed, the predators we've stopped. This year, we also bring news that another state has passed legislation inspired by the Melissa Brennan Act. She's still saving people, Dorothy said, placing a bouquet of white lilies on the headstone. As we walked back to the car, Dorothy turned to me. You know what I think about sometimes? What? All the women Garrett would have hurt if you hadn't fought back. All the Melissas who are still alive because you refused to be a victim. I thought about Zoe, now halfway through law school. About Brooke, who's finally dating again. 17 copycat schemes that were stopped because investigators knew what to look for. Women whose names I will never know who heard this story and trusted their instincts when something didn't feel right. That's the real victory. Not the money or the jail time or the media coverage. These are the women who are safe because one woman decided to read the fine print. Because one woman refused to sign away her rights for love. Because one woman proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing a predator can do is simply refuse to stay silent. Garrett thought he was being clever, including that adultery clause where he assumed I'd never notice. He was wrong. He was wrong about a lot of things, but he was especially wrong about thinking that love made women stupid. Love makes women strong. It makes them protective. It makes them willing to fight for what's right, even when the cost is high. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, love makes women angry enough to change the world. The money from the settlement was long ago spent, donated to a foundation, or spent on legal fees for other victims. But I never regretted a penny of it. After all, what's the point of money if you don't use it to keep other people from suffering the way you did? David and I are trying to have children now. And when I think about the world I want to bring them to, I'm glad it's a world where predators like Garrett are behind bars, where women like Melissa are remembered and honored, where love is measured not by what you're willing to sacrifice, but by what you're willing to protect. That's the world Patricia's prenuptial agreement helped create, and it's worth more than any prenuptial agreement ever could.